Over on Planet Fox, which loyally orbits Planet Trump, there's a new villain of the day, and it's billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates. The target on his back was born of this interview with Jake Tapper here on CNN.
Bars and restaurants in most of the country will be closed as we go into this wave, and I think, sadly, that's appropriate. Depending on how severe it is, the decision about schools is much more complicated because the benefits are pretty high. The amount of transmission is not the same as in restaurants and bars. So, trade-offs will have to be made. But the next 4 to 6 months really call on us to do our best because we can see that this will end.
During the largest surge of a deadly pandemic, this is the inconvenient truth, even with a flailing economy. Just ask the CDC. In September, it explained that adults who tested positive for coronavirus were about twice as likely to have reported dining at a restaurant than those who tested negative. But for Fox's Sunrise trio, who criticized temporarily closing bars and restaurants despite the human cost of keeping them open, when 3,000 Americans were reported dead of COVID per day, here's how they responded to that warning from Bill Gates as they broadcast from the coronavirus-safe confines of their separate television studios.
What's his problem?
Well, here's a question for Bill Gates. What sacrifices he making?
None.
He is still one of the richest people in the world because he actively engages in ways of staying in the top tier of rich people in the world. His wealth gets to grow exponentially while small business owners, maybe folks who worked for 20, 30 years, saved up, scraped, sacrificed, finally opened up the business of their dreams. He willy-nilly says it's a sacrifice we have to make. Here's the problem. Bill Gates is a globalist.
Spoken most of that like a true liberal, and there was no way that the trio was going to let that stand.
I'm not knocking him because he worked hard to make that money.
Yeah, he worked hard, but you know what? The person who's going to come and pick up this garbage outside my house today, they work hard.
Perhaps there is some common ground between Fox and AOC after all, since that there is actually the crux of the liberal argument in the wealth gap debate. But back to coronavirus restrictions, people are losing their livelihoods. Kids are out of school, they're isolated, millions and millions of Americans are hungry. So yes, there is a legitimate debate to be had about restrictions. Why are schools closed and restaurants open in many places? Can restaurants and businesses improve conditions so that they can promote a safer working or indoor dining experience? Should the government keep them afloat if they can't? How do you balance the economic toll with the human cost? But Fox and Fox Republicans paint any restriction as a government seizure of your freedoms. And now they're attacking a billionaire whose wealth they normally champion, whose foundation is donating nearly $2 billion to deliver vaccines to poor countries. More than $100 million of that money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation donated to manufacture vaccines. Gates has also donated billions of dollars over the years to focus on what? Global pandemics. But don't tell that to Planet Fox's Doctor for Hire.
By the way, Tucker, if you had me on, if that network has on a computer expert to talk about COVID instead of a physician, imagine if you had me on to talk about computers. You wouldn't do that, right? You have me on to talk about COVID.
Good point.
Now that's rich coming from Dr. Mark Siegel, celebrity doctor of internal medicine, not to be confused with celebrity doctor of epidemiology, by the way. True, he isn't exactly the Geek Squad member you want fixing your laptop, but ask yourself if he's really the MD you'd want at your bedside. As we've shown you before on this program, his medical advice ranges from sycophantic to potentially homicidal.
This virus should be compared to the flu because at worst case scenario, it could be the flu. Regarding this fall, the 1918 second wave, I've been monitoring Australia. It predicts that we're not going to have a big second wave. Under 70, it's almost impossible you're going to die, and yet from COVID, and yet fear messaging continues.
You go person, woman, man, camera, TV. They say, that's amazing.
I spent an hour with the president. That's not a cognitive exam, but at least that was in person. That wasn't via a video screen, and I got an impression of somebody that's very cognitively advanced.
Now, this Fox doc also likes to wildly speculate on the conditions of others despite his own advice.
To Speaker Pelosi, who is not a physician, I wish she would stop pontificating on the president's health, given that not only isn't she a physician, but she hasn't seen his chart.
So even though the doc hasn't seen Joe Biden's charts, by his own admission,
I haven't examined the former vice president. I don't have a clinical diagnosis to make.
but that's not stopping him from casually diagnosing Biden on national TV as being on drugs and maybe having silent strokes because he had an aneurysm 30 years ago.
I want to put forth some ideas tonight. They're not proof. They're not even theories. President Trump says, you know, we should have drug testing before debates. And I'm thinking, why would he be saying that? Well, let me tell you one reason, Tucker. There's a study that shows that for people who have mild cognitive thinking or memory problems, you know what helps? Speed. You know what helps? Adderall.
Well, now the doc is bothered about CNN interviewing Bill Gates as an expert on pandemics. Well, perhaps the good doctor needs a simple medical procedure known as having his ears cleaned, because Bill Gates has been sounding the alarm on infectious diseases and pandemics for decades in medical journals, on television, in lectures like this one that he gave more than 5 years ago.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes.
But if the Fox doc doesn't think that Bill Gates is an expert on pandemics, let's check out the experts that Fox looks to for discussions about coronavirus.
I went through the CDC data because I kept hearing about new infections, but I was like, well, why aren't they talking about this? Oh, because the number is almost nothing.
Why not name the vaccine the Trump? You know, make it like, have you gotten your Trump yet? Lockdowns and mandatory mask mandates are probably slowing the onset of herd immunity.
If somebody deliberately, it's real, but it's somebody deliberately spreading some things here. This does not make sense at all to me.
Okay. The fact of the matter is, we have people dying. 45,000 people a year die from automobile accidents, 480,000 from cigarettes, 360,000 a year from swimming pools, but we don't shut the country down for that.
The pandemic is not spiraling out of control as they project it nightly. It is the worst pandemic since 1918. Losing one life is way too many. The situation is getting better, not worse.
You can take your mask mandate and shove it right up your ass.
Now we're reading stuff about how you can damage yourself by wearing a mask, because then you're breathing back, you know, potentially microbes. Especially, you know.
This is why he won't wear a mask. He doesn't want to look funny.
We now know, thanks to widespread blood testing, that the virus isn't that deadly.
The thing in New York was you have very low-income people in very tight quarters that are touching a lot of handles and doorknobs.
Speaking of doorknobs, that is exactly what he and his pals are, on the doors that swing open every day to an alternate reality known as Planet Fox.